I'll begin this afternoon's session with a brief introduction. Welcome to the Canadian Institute of Forestry's National Electronic Lecture Program. My name is Sharon Yang, and I will be hosting today's session. Today is Wednesday, March 27th, 2024, and this is the 8th session in the e-lecture series entitled 2 Billion Trees, Tools to Grow Healthy and Resilient Trees. Actually, this is also the title for today's presentation. The series is brought to you by the Canadian Forest Service and Canadian Wood Fiber Centre. The CIF-IFC is very pleased to collaborate and host these webinars. For today's session, we are pleased to have Dasvinder Kambo and Katalijn MacAfee, who will give an exciting presentation in a few minutes. To kick things off, Dasvinder Kambo is currently a Senior Forest Science Advisor with the Research Coordination and Integration Division with the Canadian Forest Service. He is currently involved with knowledge mobilization of the 2 Billion Trees program, responsible for the conveying knowledge products from researchers to project proponents. Prior to that, Dasvinder worked with the Alberta Tree Improvement and Seed Centre as an applied tree physiologist, before transferring to the Canadian Wood Fiber Centre as a technology transfer specialist. Dasvinder holds a PhD in tree-line ecology from Queen's University in tree-line ecology and a master's from U of T ecology and evolutionary biology. Dasvinder has spent time in many regions across Canada. He was born in Montreal, spent his childhood in Toronto, enjoyed multiple summers in Atlantic Canada, and he has worked in Northern Canada. And now he lives and works out west in Edmonton. Katalijn MacAfee is currently a director with the Canadian Forest Service, splitting her time with the Great Lakes Forestry Centre in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, and the Canadian Wood Fiber Centre in Petawawa, Ontario. Katalijn has spent her whole career with the Canadian Forest Service and started as a knowledge exchange officer before becoming a restoration coordinator, working closely with the oil and gas sector in Alberta, and then the manager for the Cumulative Effects Science program before moving into the director role. She is a forester by training, and even though her job doesn't have her leave her office too often, she tries to compensate by spending the majority of her free time outside, which at the moment includes a lot of boiling maple sap, trying to create the perfect maple syrup. With that, I will now pass it over to Katalijn to begin today's session.
Thanks for that introduction, Sharon. I would like to start off that I give my presentation from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and I'm grateful to work, play, and live on this land. And then with that, I would like to thank everybody for tuning into today's e-lecture series, where we'll be talking about tools to help you grow healthy and resilient trees. I'm sure at this point you probably are quite familiar with the 2 Billion Tree program, but we'll go through some information slides at the beginning to remind you of what the program is all about, but the majority of the talk will be about the tech transfer tools that are also part of the program. And then the focus will also be on a recent publication that we did called to Grow a Green Future. I'd be amiss not to mentioning Matthew Piper, who co-owns Fuse Consulting in Alberta, who was instrumental in helping us getting this publication out. So we'll start with an update on the 2 Billion Tree program and just a reminder of what it was all about. Then we'll talk about the success from the perspective of the tree. And we'll talk about 2 Billion Tree technology transfer products. And as a guideline for that, or as I guess as a red herring through it, we'll talk about Grow a Green Future, the guide. But we'll also be mentioning other tools and resources to help you. So you may be familiar with the 2 Billion Tree program, but as I said, we'll provide a quick overview of the program thus far. And just a reminder, we're at the end of the fiscal year, so numbers may not be fully up to date or have been updated yet. So in 2019, Canada pledged to use nature-based climate solutions to provide emissions reductions, while also providing important co-benefits of human well-being and biodiversity. So the result was the implementation of the Natural Climate Solutions Fund in 2021. So it's a suite of federal programs that includes the 2 Billion Trees program, where the goals are to leverage the power of nature to reduce the effects of and adapt to climate change, all while supporting biodiversity. So emissions reductions from nature-based solutions will take time. As I think we know, it takes time to grow trees. For example, planting trees or restoring wetlands can take decades to reap the full benefits. So if our children and grandchildren are to benefit from the shade of the trees that we plant now, if they want to benefit from the shade in the future, we have to make sure that we plant them now. And a good friend of mine always says, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is to do so today. So just a quick overview. So the mandate is to use nature-based solutions to fight climate change and to stop biodiversity loss through tree planting. The challenge obviously is working with nature's schedule, aligning all factors in the supply chain and bringing benefits to all Canadians. 2 billion trees approach, well, year one was to build a foundation of the long-term success. So that has taken place. And now we're really focusing on the establishment of multi-year agreements to ramp up the supply chain and tree planting capacity, to collaborate with provinces and territories to support forest adaptation and habitat restoration, and in particular, split species risk as well. So it's a cost-shared program, except for with Indigenous peoples, where the cost sharing is much less. So there's two components to the 2 billion tree program, I guess, in a way. So supporting tree planting on crown lands with Indigenous peoples, on private lands and in urban settings. But the part that's maybe less known to people is that there is a science component as part of the program as well, which is for advancing science for improved planting outcomes. And that also includes the knowledge mobilization piece that we'll be talking about today. So just as a reminder, there's an ongoing call for proposals. If you go to the 2 billion tree website, there is information on how you potentially could submit a proposal. So it's either for afforestation, reforestation, habitat restoration. Basic eligibility is listed there, and there is a requirement to highlight and to prove that there is anticipated results of the project. And just a reminder that tree planting activities that are required under provincial SFM regulations are not eligible for funding under the 2 billion tree program. So for example, if an SFL or an FMA, depending on where you live, I guess, is required to regenerate a recently harvested stand, the trees that are used for regeneration cannot be part or cannot be funded through the 2 billion tree program. So full disclosure, I'm not exactly sure how recent this slide is. But so far, there have been over 440 proposals. Trees have been planted at over 2,900 sites. A total of 223 species have been planted, which in my view is quite remarkable. And over 21% of the proposals have been Indigenous led. And then there's a breakdown for province. So some project examples, and I won't go into too much detail, but for example, the Community Forest International, they undertook a program out east where the plan is to plant 250 trees on previously clear-cut land, and it's located in the Shigneto-Ishmus to restore degraded wildlife habitat. So it's a critical land corridor connecting New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And it's been identified as a high priority conservation area, both nationally and internationally. And then there's the Red Fish Restoration Society. So this on the other side of the country, so on the west coast of Vancouver Island, I think as far away from Nova Scotia as you can, dedicated to the conservation of wild fish through habitat restoration, resource monitoring. So this project is planning to plant over 51,000 trees. And I think it's a nice example of how this also has the co-benefits. For example, improve habitats, critical spawning and rearing habitat for endangered wild Chinook and chum salmon. So I see this as a great example of the full benefit of planting trees. So now that we've briefly reintroduced the program, the 2 billion trees program, maybe it's time to step away from the administrative side and think more about the trees. What does success like from the perspective of a tree? Obviously, from a tree's perspective, their main goal is to survive, to grow, and to thrive. As for the program, one of the main goals is to sequester carbon, to increase biodiversity, increase social benefits. But the trees don't necessarily care about that. They just want to live. So how do we, so they want to thrive. So how do we get to that stage? Before we get there, we'll talk about some of the 2.3 billion knowledge resources. So the reason that all this information we'll be using for our talk is already publicly available. So everything you'll see on our slides today, you will have, or you can have access to as well. So we do have already a lot of videos, podcasts, 2-pagers, tech notes, guidebooks, webinars, a lot of information. So we'll jump to that, and then we'll go back to how we can allow a tree to survive, thrive, and grow. So 2 billion trees knowledge exchange. Simply, rather than us putting the website down, we suggest you Google 2 billion trees, and it will get you to the website. And just a heads up that a major update is expected at the end of April 2024. So we have multiple websites and repositories that include the information, and the main site that links to almost everything can be found through this Google exercise, rather than us telling you the site. On the landing page of the Science Supporting Tree Planting website, you'll find information pertaining to seed collection, site preparation, tree planting, as well as monitoring planted trees. There's quite a bit of information there. So as we mentioned, there will be major updates. So we suggest you come back by the end of April to check that out. And maybe people are familiar with the CFS bookstore that then changed to the CFS publications database, which has recently been changed to the Open Science and Technology Repository. So you can search virtually for any CFS publication that has been published since 1905. It's got about 23,000 resources using this repository. So it's a great starting place. However, all the publications online are all PDFs. So our videos and the other items that the podcast that we mentioned, they are not here. So rather than, the only thing you'll find on the OSTR is written text. And then there's rigid rules and accessibility rules for anything that's published on the OSTR. So that's why we sometimes have to look at other areas to publish our, oops, I think I went too fast, to look at other places to put our 2 billion trees related publications. So that brings us to the Canadian Conservation and Land Management Portal as one example. So this project that's dear to my heart. It was established a few years ago together with the NBCKC, so the National Boreal Caribou Knowledge Consortium of ECCC, NAIT Boreal Research Institute, Innotech Alberta, Ducks Unlimited, and ourselves, because we, for the reasons that I just mentioned, sometimes if you want to publish something on a federal website, you have to there are strict accessibility language and other rules, and this allowed us to put information out there in one place that makes it easily accessible for mostly end users. So it started with 3 portals, and currently it recently added a Indigenous portal as well. So there's a lot of technical and real world information on this portal. So I would highly recommend you check this out. It's cclmportal.ca. And most recently, we have been able to add a lot of our 2 billion tree tech transfer information on this website. And to add, a lot of information is now also becoming available in French. So more and more information on this website will be available in French as well. And this is just an example of some of the information you'll find on the portal, and I would highly recommend that you go check it out yourself. But from a 2 billion trees perspective, there's a guide for tips and tricks for successful tree planting. There's an interactive app, Plant R, that can be used to determine the species mixes that should be planted. There's the first of a 3-part series information report on white spruce. There's an incredible amount of information on white spruce that has taken decades to compile. And again, if you're interested in white spruce, I highly recommend you check that out. And then there's many videos on the CCLM portal that outline issues related to 2 billion of that are of importance to 2 billion trees, stakeholders and users such as seed selection, nursery issues, genomics, etc. And I think with that, I'll pass it over to Dasvinder, who will start talking about the goals to survive the threat.
Thank you, Katalijn. I'm really quickly going to share screen. Perfect. All right. Just let me. Perfecto. All right, share screen, and we're gonna share this one. Excellent. I hope everyone can see what I can see, which is the last slide. Perfect. I'm getting some nods. All right, let's move over. So we had really briefly had mentioned we described the places where we can go to access the information, and now we're going to go back to our original query. The main goal is for trees to survive and to thrive. So how do we get to a point where we can actively do that? So to help us with that, we've jointly published a guide. This was with Katalijn mentioned with Fuse Consulting. And the guide is called the Guide for Successful Tree Planting, Growing a Green Future. And we're going to be going through parts of the guide today, and we're going to be using this as like as a jumping or a platform to jump off and kind of describe other resources that the Canadian Forest Service and 2 Billion Trees has published. So the guide itself has quite a few sections, including a part about getting started, identifying goals, tree species, preparing site, planting, and monitoring. So deciding what tree species to plant at a chosen site requires you to consider a few factors. The first factor involves matching the site's characteristics with trees with species that will eventually grow there. So this is the whole knowing your site, the site histories. And you start off by capturing aerial images, and you can do this from open access mapping sources. You can fly your own drones. You can use provincial or regional mapping sources, and I really recommend using these. And at the very least, just going through Google Maps. Figure out what is it that you're seeing. Are there areas of the site that frequently have pooled water? Does the land adjacent to your site have tall trees that cast a lot of shade? You want to mark out areas where you don't think trees can grow very well, like wetlands, rocky outcrops, etc. Then despite the importance of drones, walking around the site is always important. Do you have rolling hills? Is it flat? Does it change significantly from one side to another? Are there signs of the site history of past disturbances? Just going around and having a general look at your site and writing down what you can see, it goes a long way in creating a very robust plan. And also take time to ask why the land is currently not being used, and whether the use itself will be changed in the future. Understanding your site history can reveal factors that definitely will influence growth. Sometimes topsoils are removed from sites and sold. Sometimes there are formal gravel pits that are compacted. And some sites were once wetlands that will likely have high water tables. Understanding these characteristics of your site will go a long way into ensuring that you're successful. Within the guide, there exists a site assessment checklist that you can use. And by no means is this amazingly thorough assessment, but it does do a good job of getting you to think about the sort of stuff that you should consider. So the assessment, the checklist is here, but it's also available in the guide. Now, next, you need to think about the long-term goals for your site. And the tree species that you will choose will forge the foundation of the ecosystem that you're hoping to create. Is there a view you enjoy and want to protect? Are you hoping to attract wildlife? Are you planning to create shelter belts or wind buffers? Restoring habitat? Are you trying to do some erosion control? Are you going to plant a future cut block that you want to chop down in 80 years? Like, what is it? What are your goals? And part of this is, do you want animals to graze there? Are there high density deer populations, seismic line considerations? You need to kind of think about all of these things. And so this is now a plug for the CCLM, the Canadian Conservation Land Management portal that Katalijn had already mentioned. There are resources on the CCLM that can help with goal management. For example, the Plant R tool that Katalijn already mentioned. This tool, unfortunately, is not available on the Open Science and Technology repository. So this is the official CFS repository. It's one of those unfortunate things. Like, this tool itself is published by CFS researchers. It's been funded by CFS, but due to accessibility concerns with the actual slider features themselves, it's not available on the CFS website. So we put it up on the CCLM. Regardless, the Plant R is a great tool. There are 6 sliders that you can, slide your preferences, and you can choose things like the number of forest species, canopy species, resistance to invasions, etc. What your general restoration goals are, what your budget is per hectare. And then boom, out pops a list of species that it recommends that you should plant. It's an insanely cool tool. And you can just play around with it just for fun like I do, but it also actually helps quite a bit with restoration in itself. And this tool itself was made for Central Ontario, but you can certainly cautiously apply it to other nearby areas. Now, part of the Plant R tool, it helps us with species selection. But that leads us to the next obvious question, like, how does one choose species? Now, as you can imagine, Canada is really big. Different regions of Canada support different tree species depending on the host of climate, soil, elevational information, etc. Now, this is a color-coded map that you guys are looking at right now. And this is available in the guide. And it's very generalized. It's an overview. There's nothing specific, but it does show us through color coordination what types of general tree species that you can apply in you can plant in a given area. This is similar to that. As you can imagine, that just given the variety in the geographic space of Canada, there's quite a bit that we can plant here. With that being said, spruce is by far the most common species by volume. Poplar, pine, fir, and hemlock make up the top 5. So conifers are in this particular situation, as you can tell, greatly outnumber hardwoods. So it is something to consider when choosing your tree species. Other special considerations when thinking about your tree species, planting native versus non-native species. Now, native species are obviously always generally speaking, the better choice. But in some instances, for example, mostly for municipalities, non-native species may be desired to accomplish a very specific goal. You need to learn about the tree pests and diseases in your areas, how they'll affect the species that you've chosen. Getting hardwood trees to grow is harder and more expensive than conifers, and requires more extensive site prep. So that's also something to think about. Areas closer to water will require different species. Planting more than one species diversification leads to an increase in overall chances of survival, but could be a lot more logically demanding. And also the post-planting support. Now, every province has great maps. And because I'm in Alberta right now, I have the Alberta map, but by no means is Alberta the only province that does this. There are seed zone maps that are available. And many provinces, like I said, do have something like this. So these seed zone maps do also help us with species consideration. It helps us with figuring out what seeds to use, how to use them, and like I said, the species. So please feel free to also consult the provincial counterparts. So in addition to the guide, the Canadian Forest Service also has a really cool app that's available to help people determine what tree species they can also plant. This is based off of plant hardiness zones. This app is free. You can download it from the Play Store or the MyTree website or the iOS store. I believe those are all the stores for apps. Well, at least those are the ones that we support. And this app is amazingly useful for urban and suburban environments. It's less useful for large-scale planting of cut blocks, but it is something, nevertheless, that I would strongly look into. Now, for large-scale tree planting, mostly for reforestation and reclamation purposes, another resource to consider is tree improvement. Very briefly, tree improvement is a process whereby trees with naturally better growth we define as taller, but it doesn't necessarily need to be taller. It can be drought tolerance or pest tolerance or whatever climate change proofing, but these better trees are selected for. And most of the time, these better trees are grown in orchards and their seeds are collected and planted instead of natural seeds. Now, I must be clear, these programs are provincially managed. Most reforestation programs are. So there's plenty of advantages of consulting and also collaborating with provincial governments. Now, using tree improvement seed over naturally occurring ones does have also has a lot of advantages. But logistically, one of the main advantages is that you already have the seed collected. You just call up the provincial centers, you call up the seed storage facilities, and you're like, hey, I want these seeds. And then the owners of the seed can actually ship it off to the nursery. So it makes it a little bit easier if you are looking into tree or to superior trees or seeds that are already collected from these seeds. Now, I want also to rectify or not rectify, but I also want to like set at ease to people that the samples that are collected, the tree improvement programs that exist are very well vetted. There are progeny trials, there are provenance trials, so don't worry about planting monocultures or families. These seeds are very well vetted, like I said. So if you're not opting to go with pre-collected seed, you can also go out and collect your own seed. The ins and outs of seed collection, what you can collect, registering the seed, how many seeds to collect from are all governed by the provinces. With that being said, there are loads of resources available on the Canadian Conservation Land Management Portal, the CCLM, as well as the OSTR, the Open Science and Technology Repository. They absolutely have a lot of resources that can help you with this, how to do collections for, etc. There are videos that are present on the CCLM that actually go out and do the collections, and you can see how to do them. The National Tree Seed Centre is a Canadian Forest Service organization that also has loads of resources around seed and are an amazing resource to get into contact with. So the NTSC is doing some pretty cool research in the context of 2 billion trees. Now, the National Tree Seed Centre has 13,000 unique seed collections. They have over 200 tree and shrub species. They have multiple restoration projects, like close to 500 seed lots. The National Seed Supply Assessment surveys that they've been doing, they have over 115, I believe, respondents from coast to coast. They have digital x-rays. They have a lot of subject matter experts that can help out with, they can help nurseries, they can help people who are doing the planting. They have in-person training sessions, they have technology transfer, they have in-house tours. They are doing an amazing amount of work to help out with the 2 billion trees program, and even outside the 2 billion trees program. Most recently, the coordinator, Donnie McPhee, traveled across Canada for the Indigenous Seed Collections Program, visited multiple Indigenous communities, trained volunteers on collecting tree and shrub seeds. There's a rather lengthy Twitter, or I think it's now called X. There's a rather lengthy X feed that doesn't have the same ring to it, but it's true, the Twitter feed. And they also have some pretty cool articles available on the NTSC website. If I put up Melissa's email information right up on the slide there, so please feel free to email her should you have any questions about NTSC related research, or you just want to inquire more about seminars and training opportunities. All right, so sticking with choosing tree species, despite growing approximately 500 to 600 million tree seedlings a year, Canadian tree nurseries are still lacking space. It can take up to 4 years to go from planting to seeding to germinating to growing in a greenhouse. It's something to consider. Therefore, we strongly recommend contacting local nurseries ahead of time to ensure that stock is available. One of the things that nurseries can help you out with is to go through some of what we call critical factors. For example, larger size, older seedlings have far higher survivorship in the field, but like, as you can imagine, they're a lot more pricey and are a bit more difficult to manage. given the root size. So it's something to think about. Nurseries can help out with this. Another issue to think of is whether you want bare root seedlings versus plugs or container seedlings. Bare root seedlings are much more natural, but they're prone to drying out. Again, nurseries can help out with a lot of this information. Another resource to jump into is the Canadian Tree Nursery Association. So very recently, I believe this was last year in 2023, a large group of nurseries combined some of the resources to advocate on behalf of the Canadian tree nurseries. They call themselves Canada Tree Nursery Association. They have membership right across the country. And subsequently, they have access to some pretty cool cutting edge and important tree nursery information. On their website, you'll find lots of important resources, responses to the 2BT national program, NTSC issues. There's an overlap with Canadian Forest Service staff, as there's a vested interest, as you can imagine, with what we're doing and what the group is doing. And with that being said, just a little bit of a disclaimer, Natural Resources Canada is a science partner here. So if you have any questions, I put Rob Keene's email address on the slide. Please feel free to contact him as well. Excuse me. Okay, so next we figured out the tree species. So next is preparing the site. And I know it's kind of difficult. You have a lot of juggling to do, right? Like you know your site, you identify your goals, you kind of based on your goals in your site, you kind of have a species list. But the species list itself is also influenced by your site, right? So the site influences your species list, but the species list is also influenced by the site. So there's a lot happening here. But eventually, you know, through enough thinking, you kind of figure some of this stuff out. You know your site, you identify some goals and species, and you converse with the nurseries. And while they're preparing your seedlings, you need to do some site prep. What do? Well, it depends on what type of site you have. As you figured out from step one, whatever issue you're having with your site, you need to deal with those issues. And there are corresponding issues to deal with. So this site prep information is available, like I said, on the OSTR and on the CCLM. This is actually from the Site Preparation Guide by Natural Resources Canada. And it shows that there are multiple things that you can do to address site issues. The most common ones are mounding, scalping, scarification, disc trenching. There's a lot of things that you can do to help out with site prep. And also available on the CCLM are some videos that actually just show the site prep happening. They're just the YouTube videos, sorry, not the YouTube, the CCLM videos actually just show the site prep actually occurring. So just search for site preparation and you can filter the search result by clicking on video. And like I said, there are mounding, soil salvaging, mixing and scalping. There's soil decompaction videos. A lot of these videos already exist and they're just kind of ready for you guys to look at. So now we've talked about site prep. Now let's go to the next issue, which is actual planting. Now, the timing of tree planting is key to tree survival. The best time to plant is early in the spring or in the fall to give seedlings adequate time to adjust before actual heat of the summer. And the actual ideal time will depend on your local climate. So it's important to contact your local nursery professionals or Indigenous elders to determine the appropriate planting windows for your area. Critically, the timing of planting will also depend on soil conditions. So soils do need to be fully thawed above 5 degrees Celsius, but not too warm, right? So like this very narrow window, unfortunately, between too wet and too dry, particularly for clay-heavy soils, need to be included in your plans. Being prepared to adjust your timing based on the weather is also pretty critical. Conifer tree species tend to be hardier and can often handle warmer temperatures right after planting. But hardwoods, on the other hand, do tend to have a higher risk of drying out before they can establish. The 4 main stress patterns associated with seedlings during transport and planting are moisture imbalance, temperature fluxes, improper handling and storage. So it's incredible to think about that aspect when getting your seedlings from the nursery to your site where you're actually going to be doing the planting. And you also should think about the storage of the seedlings while you're planting and the planting techniques themselves. Now, again, not to sound like a broken record here, but on the CCLM, there are about 200 planting resources alone. So there's quite a bit of information on just planting. There are guides to planting in urban environments, on shorelines. There are differences between plugs and bare roots. There's an insane amount of information available on the CCLM. Additionally, in addition to the CCLM, we also have some stuff on the OSTR. So over here, there's a spacing trial that has 60 years of data. And there's on this, it shows, hey, what is the right spacing to use? What is the correct density to use? A lot of this information has already been parsed out through decades of research, and it's available on the OSTR as well as the CCLM. We also have some new research currently underway. And it describes the differences between using traditional planting techniques and using what we call planting pucks. These are pretty much just like hockey pucks, except with tree seed. And it's pretty critical to the Canadian Forest Service. So we've been investing quite heavily into its funding. And these planting pucks are going to be continuously more important, especially given the wildfire situation that we're going to be seeing over the next little while. So I strongly recommend people checking out the new Tree Planting 101 guide on the OSTR as well as on the CCLM. Okay, now suppose that you've done all the hard work, you've done all the planning, you've planted your site, you're giving your trees the final support they need by monitoring their growth and health. Now, trees often need to be maintained for years after planting to ensure they reach maturity. Now, different provincial guidelines are also important here. But you need to make sure that they are maintained and they all are monitored. So you have to put in some type of maintenance plan. And in this case, deer deterrence or rodent deterrence. Vegetation competition with the seedlings for water may also need to be controlled with manual cutting. So that's something to think about. Sometimes you need physical barriers. Sometimes you need targeted herbicide application. And the species that you're trying to control, their density and their height will determine how aggressive you need to be. Sometimes you just need to mow like once or twice a year for a couple of years and then you're ready to go. Sometimes you need to do something else. Sometimes you don't need to do anything. So it kind of depends on your site. Sites being heavily browsed by herbivores, like I've mentioned, the deer deterrent, also need to be adequately assessed. Now, there's a lot of resources and research currently underway on monitoring. A lot of this involves drone work. I really strongly recommend that you guys check this out on the CCLM and the OSTR. We're currently funding 9 research projects just to study post-planting monitoring. And this is to streamline the old-fashioned way. So when I was in grad school, we would plant stuff and then we'd have to spend the next 2-3 years of field season just going around and checking it over and over. And we're trying to minimize this, hence the amount of resources that we're putting into this new the new research. In the next few months, maybe in next year, we'll start publishing the results of a lot of these studies to better aid post-planting monitoring. So please, I strongly recommend to continue assessing what resources we have available. Now, we do have a lot of tools, and I've gone through a lot of tools, and Katalijn also mentioned quite a few tools. I just wanted to reiterate the tools. So one, there's a 2 Billion Trees Science website. So that's available on the Canadian Forest Service. Please go ahead and Google it, 2BT Science, and it should be the first or second post that pops up. There's the Open Science and Technology Repository. So we refer to this as the OSTR. That houses the official published material for the Canadian Forest Service. We have the Canadian Conservation and Land Management Portal, which I think I've mentioned about half a dozen times right now. So the CCLM is really, really important. It has a lot of information. Please feel free to check that out as well. Another resource is the National Tree Seed Center, and that is a federal center. Melissa's information is right up there. And then if you have general 2 billion trees related questions to help out with the application to anything 2BT related, that's the general email address. It is monitored consistently. And after you email that, they kind of do a little bit of a triage and make sure the question goes to the right person. Okay, so I wanted to close with a short with a short description of a project. I'm really happy about this project. I'm pretty excited. So this is the brainchild of Nutrien in the Canadian Wood Fiber Centre. To say that a lot of resources went into this would be an understatement. They put a lot of research into this. So this project involves using phosphogypsum stacks. So phosphogypsum, also called PG, is a waste product of sorts, and it's produced when we're making fertilizer. So there's a lot of fertilizer production, as you can imagine, in Western Canada. Now, with these PG or phosphogypsum stacks, there's not a whole lot to do. You just kind of stack them in place and cap them and call it a day. Well, with the help of our Canadian Wood Fiber Centre researchers, Nutrien embarked on a process where they collectively planted high-yield hybrid poplars. So this is a lot of work that Tim Keddy and Derek Sitters from the Wood Fibers did alongside Connie Nickel from Nutrien. And these trees allowed for a thriving community to be present on top of the stacks, whereas in normal situations, the stacks would just remain. Now, it's an important example. It's a critical example of knowing and studying the site, identifying your goals, knowing the right species, preparing the site, and then post-planting monitoring. So this study adequately assesses everything. There's a quick video, and I'm gonna be showing you that video very shortly. But in addition, there's a very lengthy methodology report that's written more at a lay terms, but it's still on the long side. But it does a very good job of explaining exactly what happened, what species were used, what the monitoring protocols were. There's a lot of information available there. I strongly recommend people checking it out. Now, let us see if I can sorry, just give me 2 shakes of a lamb's tail. Here we go. I'm just going to play the video real quick. Alrighty, so yeah, that was it. Thank you for looking at the video. And again, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. And I want everyone to stay tuned. There's always more information being put up on the OSTR, the Open Science and Technology Repository, as well as on the Land Management Portal, the CCLM. So with that, I would like to thank everybody, and I also want to especially thank all the CFS researchers that provided the information, as well as all the technology transfer specialists within the Canadian Forest Service that has also helped us prepare the slideshow. and as well as the Canadian Institute of Forestry for giving us this platform. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Thank you, Dasvinder and Katalijn. That was a great presentation. So before we proceed to the Q&A session, let's take
I don't know if Sharon just froze at like
I think
the
she did.
fortunate time.
survey. I'm just gonna launch. Sorry, guys. Did I
You
get cut
froze
off?
there. It's okay.
Sorry about that. I was about to say that thank you guys for the great presentation. So before we proceed to the Q&A session, I'm gonna launch a poll. Just one moment. I'm gonna try one more time.
I don't see the poll, Sharon.
It's very interesting.
Yeah.
Hold on one moment.
So
Is
Jody,
it coming up?
it's coming up right now. Thank you.
Okay, I'm glad. All right, so the first question.
I think I'm just going to, while Sharon's a little frozen,
Mine is
Jody mentioned that the BC Seed Orchard Association, the Northwest Seed Orchard Managers Association have great annual extension meetings and field workshops. So there are parallel groups in other regions, but I also, like, depending on where you are, please do check in with the provincial organizations. They're a great resource.
Oh, I'm back online again. Sorry, guys. So there's one question. I mean, it's more like a comment in the Q&A pod that Robert is mentioning. Please post the URL for the video about the Alberta PG project.
Oh, yeah, sure. I absolutely can do that. I'll do that right as we're speaking.
Okay. Thank you, Dasvinder. While Dasvinder is typing, I just want to quickly remind everybody that this session is being recorded and the recording will soon be available on our open access e-lecture webpage. And the presentation slides will also be available for everybody who needs to review it.
Perfect. Well, thank you. I don't see any more questions. I think that means that Katalijn and I are off the hook here.
Yeah. All right. Thank you again, everyone, for joining today's
Oh,
practice.
sorry. Trevor just asked one about the Indigenous growing and planting. Yes, okay. So now the questions are starting to pop up. All right, we're good. So yeah, Indigenous growing and planting. So we do actually have an Indigenous hub available on the CCLM. So absolutely, like, please make your way to the CCLM, and there is an Indigenous hub that's available on that. There's a sub portal available on that. Do you know the direction for measuring the results? No, I do know that there are currently working. So like I just had a very brief discussion with the data team, I think 2 weeks ago, and they're still finalizing the carbon sequestration, like exactly how to measure that. And we have general guidelines, and the research I think has been completed. They're just kind of firming up everything to make it official. Perfect. I think that's it on our end.
Is there one more question in the Q&A pod, I think?
Oh,
From anonymous
about eating
attendee?
of the food. Yeah, I'm not sure actually what they did with the food. I'm not sure. I don't want to give, I know that they grew it to see if it could grow. I'm not sure if that food, the pumpkins and the squash and all that was actually given away or not, or eaten. I'm really not sure.
I think that's the last question in the Q&A pod. If there are no more questions coming up, I would like to bring this session to a close. Thank you all for participating in our CIF electronic lectures. And once again, thank you very much to Dasvinder and Katalijn for this great presentation. Bye, everyone.
Enjoy the
Thanks
rest of
for
your day.
listening,
Thank you.
everybody. Bye.